In the early days of Nintendo, gamers were limited to simple conflicts without much depth, so we didn't have too many moral implications to consider. But we've come a long way since the days of mindlessly stomping on turtles, right? Right? My first exposure to video games came in the form of an 8-bit plumber, and I was intoxicated by what I found there. It was new and exciting, it was full of secrets, and it had the kind of simple conflict I could wrap my young mind around, saving a princess from an evil monster. It seems obvious that, as those of us who grew up on Super Mario Bros. Have gotten older, the video game industry has had to mature with us. But is this really a valid way of thinking? We see games like Fallout 3 and BioShock Infinite, and we can't deny that complex stories have become the bread and butter of the gaming industry. But is it because gamers have grown up, or because the world has become more complicated? A good way to examine this is to look at the growth of the Mario franchise. Born in the middle of a fear-inducing Cold War, Mario did not need a complex villain to flesh him out. At the time, many nations had very clear lines drawn between political friend and enemy, and these black and white viewpoints reflect themselves in the early Mario games. At a time when many of us did not question who our enemy was, we were perfectly content with an unquestionably evil Demon King. But times have changed, and with them, so have villains. In 2007's Super Paper Mario, we find a wealth of sympathetic villains who serve to question our views on the struggle between good and evil. Of course, the greatest example of this in-game is the game's original antagonist, Count Bleck, who we find has only transformed into a destroyer of worlds due to pain and loss. But even in the game's minor antagonists, we find intentions we can sympathize with. Bleck's naive underlings Mimi and Ochunks are driven by the hope that a perfect world can be created in place of the flawed worlds that they know. And we discover that the evidently villainous Floro-Sapiens only attack the Kragnons as a reaction to ills that have been perpetrated against them. All of these villains have reasons for causing harm, unlike the completely evil King Koopa from Super Mario Bros. In fact, Bowser himself has been, due to circumstances, turned into an ally, much in the same way he was in Super Mario RPG. These complicating motivations and changing allegiances mirror the blurred lines that we see in the real world, brought on by increased globalization. And they also acknowledge that we understand that everyone acts based on what they think is right, even when we disagree. With increasing understanding that international conflicts are no longer as simple as good guys versus bad guys, we may find ourselves demanding more complex stories from our games, but we do not ignore history. As George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And Super Paper Mario is haunted by the past. Particularly, the Dark Prognosticus and the Light Prognosticus exist almost as characters in their own right to pull the past into the present. In addition to these, there are also people who exist as remnants of the past, such as Merlon and his kin, who are so driven by these prophetic books that they can see little beyond them. So there is much focus on the knowledge derived from looking back, and a certain reverence is held for those who came before. But is this reverence well placed? The game seems to question the notion that we should rely wholly on either the past or our ancestors to give us insight into the present. Although we have some fairly dignified representatives of the Light Prognosticus in the game, many of the ancient and elderly characters are written as either comically enfeebled or, in the case of one, annoying and secretive. Squirps, who is revealed to be a being from the time of the ancients with a special mission to aid the heroes of legend, proves himself to be an inconvenience, and his personality irritates the heroes to no end. As a representative of the past, he inspires little confidence. Ultimately, he is revealed to be a child who has been entrusted to fulfill prophecy, and this is supposed to excuse his behavior. It may excuse his behavior, but the wisdom of the ancients has to be called into question here. Why entrust such a delicate mission to a child who easily loses focus? Perhaps because the ancients' knowledge is flawed to begin with. Merlon even states that the Light Prognosticus cannot be totally trusted, as it is not truly prophetic. These wise ancients, who write about a great battle to save all worlds from an evil force, are implied to have great flaws in their notions about this future conflict. That leads us to believe that, in the universe of Super Paper Mario, knowledge derived from the past can't actually be trusted. The game becomes even more damning of the past than these casual implications of ignorance, however. Black's metamorphosis from a man driven by love to a man controlled by a destructive need for vengeance is only made possible due to the blatantly racist and backwards thinking of his father. When he curses Timpani to wander between dimensions, he only does so because of his outdated notions of blood purity and social hierarchies. Black's father, as a representative of a generation bred from distrust and hate, cannot see how the love of his son for a human could possibly outweigh the demands of his society. As such, we are made to understand that it is only because of the previous generation's inability to accept new ways of looking at old enemies that true destruction comes to reign supreme. Like us, those in the world of Super Paper Mario must avoid old, stereotypical views of those around them, lest they become victims of a combative tunnel vision, which only serves to literally swallow everyone and everything into a chaotic void. Thus, as George Santayana cautioned, the lessons of the past are not so much an instruction manual as they are a warning. What this tells us is that, in a very deliberate way, Super Paper Mario warns us against falling back into the temptation of dividing the world around us into restrictive notions of good and evil. While this simplicity may have been useful at some point in the past, and we certainly found joy in those games that played on these basic struggles, we should no longer be satisfied with simple explanations or certainties. Instead, we should avoid the dangers of black and white thinking and decide what is right for us. What is most disturbing about this, however, is that Super Paper Mario backtracks on this issue. After the game spends so much time and effort building up these complex conflicts and nuanced antagonists, we see old patterns re-emerge near the end of the game. The first hint of this comes in World 7, where we see the introduction of a two-dimensional boss character who only seeks destruction and power for unknown reasons. Judging by his own words, Bone Chill is simply inherently evil. This is only the beginning, though. Later, as the player works their way through Count Bleck's castle, there arise these basic, petty conflicts between the supporting protagonists and the secondary antagonists, which eventually serve to separate the heroes from one another. So, even though the game has begun to rely on these old strategies of basic antagonism, there is a hint here that the creators of Super Paper Mario still understand that this kind of petty, vendetta-based fighting can only serve to divide. Unfortunately, the creators themselves fall into the temptation to simplify the conflict, when the true antagonist is revealed to be none other than a power-hungry Dementio. They move focus from an interesting, complex antagonist with understandably human motivations onto a mustache-twirling villain with dreams of conquest, like the King Koopa of the original Super Mario Bros. We should be extremely disturbed by this. While the creators have spent the entire game attempting to warn us of the dangers of these simplistic ways of thinking about conflict, they end up trapping themselves in the same kind of thinking they're trying to prevent. Perhaps this is intentional. Maybe they're just trying to show us how difficult it is to think outside of this good versus evil dynamic. But it seems unlikely. The unintended lesson seems to be that it is difficult, if not impossible, for us to think outside of these us versus them scenarios. Although history has taught us that we need to complicate the ways we think about conflicts, and that good and evil are just ways for us to avoid humanizing our enemies, it is much simpler and much more psychologically convenient for us to brand our adversaries with labels so that we can imagine them to be unquestionably evil. Perhaps the trap is just too difficult to escape, but the warnings given to us by the creators of Super Paper Mario tell us that we have to keep trying. Maybe, as we watch plots and enemies become increasingly complex in video games, we can work out these growing pains, and we'll find something great on the other side. Thanks for watching, everyone. This was a really fun analysis to do this week. I had a lot of fun playing the game again, and I had a lot of fun doing the analysis. This is the kind of analysis I wanted to start this show to do, and it was a lot of fun to do that. With that being said, though, I think I'll be a little bit less heavy next week, probably do something a little more lighthearted. I'm still going to focus on Super Paper Mario, because I don't think I'm done looking at that game yet. If you haven't seen the Shadow of the Colossus videos yet, check those out. If you don't know what I'm doing here, I have an intro video posted that kind of lets you know what we're trying to accomplish with this channel. That would be a good place to start. But other than that, I'm really looking forward to doing some more of these analyses. I'm really excited about the channel. All the usual stuff. Please like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, your dog, your cat, your fish. I don't care. Don't share with anybody. Enjoy it to yourself. Keep it selfish. It's really up to you. But, you know, it's fun to make these videos, and I'd like to be able to keep doing it, so I hope people enjoy them. But other than that, I'm still having fun, so I'm still going to keep doing it, so I will see you next week with another analysis of Super Paper Mario. Take care.